Being human.
Being human. I like how you guys say that whenever I listen to the podcast. It's like, being human.
Being human.
So since later on we'll be discussing the culture shift of athletes receiving financial support, we wanted to highlight another change that needs to happen, and that is more support for mental health care. In an article from Global Sports Matters, Gen X or Gen Z is described as being on the brink of the worst mental health crisis in decades. Just this last year, public admissions from athletes at all levels of competition proved the prevalence of mental health issues. Despite this, many student athletes are still afraid to seek help, finding that it can be challenging, especially if their coach isn't supportive. So Frank, what changes do schools need to implement to foster better mental health outcomes?
Well, this is a really interesting article because I encountered this situation recently where a coach was very angry with a D1 athlete because he needed to have a therapy day and required a lot of documentation. And so I can see why athletes are not likely to come forward. And I also liken it to sort of the police culture, that it's a very kind of closed off world and it's rather insular. And I think the main thing is going to be having ongoing dialogue with the counseling departments of colleges, but also colleges being willing to fund them, because I'm also finding a lot of counseling departments are just farming therapy out, and it doesn't seem like it's a priority, and that's a top-down conversation where the culture emphasize mental health care as a priority.
Well, you know, when I think about athletics, there's always a lot of pressure, even from known injury, like physical injuries, right? An athlete, pulls a muscle, a hamstring, and that's identifiable, and yet there's constant pressure of like getting back into the game, and that's something that, from a physical standpoint, everybody can either see, or you have doctors that are already verifying that, and yet they already feel this immense pressure to suck it up. So I can't imagine how difficult it is for something that's more invisible, like mental health, mental illness, as well as the pressure, not just that the student may have for themselves, but from their teammates, from their coaching staff. And when you think about, and we're going to get into this, the high pressure of the economics of collegiate sports, the pressure is on coaches to win, right? And where that can unintentionally create a culture of just suck it up, lack of understanding or support, furthering that stigma, because it's a really difficult thing for a lot of people, but especially, let's say, young men, college age folks, super competitive and successful athletes, to acknowledge, like, I'm struggling and I don't know what to do.
Yeah. And I don't know, in the article, the piece that stood out to me was Jim Harbaugh was quoted kind of minimizing the situation in some regards, and got a lot of backlash, because basically what he stated is this is something that student athletes can take advantage of so that they can transfer to other universities because of mental health issues and then still have eligibility. So he got a lot of backlash for that. But to be honest with you, I try to kind of balance the thought process, see both extremes, and see what point he's really trying to make. And I think there is something there. I wouldn't necessarily say that I agree with him, but I think I see where he's going with that. You think about like Gardner Minshew. Is that his name, Gardner Minshew? Yep. Yeah, the new quarterback for Jacksonville Jaguars, and he was interviewed recently and stated that he tried to break his arm or his hand on purpose just so he can get a medical red shirt so that he can play. So there is a little bit of that culture within college sports where you have a certain amount of time to build your resume so that you can go professional. So is this another loophole potentially, is what Jim Harbaugh was saying. Don't necessarily agree with it, but I can see what he was going after in that argument.
Yeah, I think the larger conversation expands beyond just collegiate sports and collegiate athletes, which is the mental health crisis that is on college campuses, because this is not in isolation. It's not as though only the athletes are struggling with mental health and mental health services. And what you brought up, Frank, is it can be really challenging when a lot of the services they go only just directs them to go see somebody else, or that the services that they have available is really peer level, that they don't really have a strong understanding and experience of helping somebody. Or if there is already a lot of embarrassment or fighting through a stigma of services that are on campus where it's public and visible, and that you're basically kind of being exposed that you're struggling with something that can sometimes prevent people from seeking help versus outside sources and things of that nature. I mean, it's definitely, I think you hit it on the nose of it. It's a complicated issue and there's a lot of nuances, but I don't think anybody's denying that this generation of young adults are really struggling with their mental health.
I would also say one piece that highlights that is the culture that we have around substance use and abuse within sports and how that's identified as an issue that needs to be addressed. But as mental health professionals, we know that coping, substance use and abuse is one of the top, or is the top way in which adolescents cope. So if we acknowledge that there's a substance abuse and use issue in college athletics or in the greater population, then are we not also acknowledging that there's a mental health issue going on there?
Right.
Yep. Thanks for watching this Being Human segment from the Shrink Tank podcast. To watch the full episode, click here, or to check out previous episodes, click here.